In 1925, an expedition from the Batavian Botanical Garden ventured deep into the Salak mountain range in western Java, searching for orchid species that local residents whispered about with trepidation. We carried herbarium presses in oilcloth, compasses, and botanical reference books, but found tracks on the trails too large for gibbons and dead flying squirrels laid out in a circle under the banyan trees. What descended from the caves behind the Citadel waterfall left behind only torn equipment, blood on the rocks, and the realization that some heights of the jungle do not belong to us. So before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. The morning of September 9th greeted us at the foot of Mount Salak with stifling humidity that pressed our shirts against our backs even before sunrise. The air hung motionless, saturated with the smell of humus and blooming orchids, the temperature already rising to 28 degrees, even though the sun had barely broken through the canopy of the rainforest. Fog lingered in the hollows, white and thick, obscuring everything above 50 feet off the ground. Dr. Hendrik van Horn, the expedition's chief botanist, wore a cork helmet, faded from many seasons under the tropical sun, and held a worn notebook in his hands, in which he recorded every plant he encountered along the way. Thomas Reinhard, a zoologist with 15 years of experience in the Dutch East Indies, moved ahead of the group with a double-barreled shotgun loaded with buckshot slung across his shoulder, his eyes constantly scanning the canopy above us. Peter Smith, our 17-year-old assistant preparator, dragged a box of tools and behaved with the nervous enthusiasm of a young man who had never been in a real jungle before. Tsarist Russia, the 52-year-old senior guide with a scar across his left eyebrow and hands gnarled from decades of work, walked silently and spoke only when asked, translating between Dutch and Sundanese with the patience of a man accustomed to the incomprehension of white people. Agus and Bambang, porters aged 28 and 35 respectively, carried the main load, their bare feet clinging to the slippery roots with the confidence born of practice. Darman, the youngest porter, aged 24, with a constant smile and quick movements, brought up the rear. The food supply included 20 pounds of rice in jute bags, beef jerky wrapped in banana leaves, dried fish smelling of salt and smoke, hard biscuits that could be stored for months, and pemmican that Reinhard had brought back from his previous expedition to Borneo. We set out at dawn from the village of Pasir Madang, following a hunter's trail that wound its way up the slope through thickets of tree ferns and rattan palms. The first 3 hours passed in a steady climb, the only sounds being the creaking of our baskets, the rustling of our footsteps on fallen leaves, and the occasional cries of gibbons somewhere above us. The temperature remained constant, the air becoming slightly thinner with every 100 feet of elevation. By 10 o'clock, we reached the first stream, clear and cold, flowing down from high ledges, and stopped to fill our canteens. The day before our departure, the village elder, a stooped man with shoulder-length white hair and eyes clouded by cataracts, came out to meet us in front of the whole community. He was holding a bamboo basket with a chicken and a bowl of rice. Sutrin translated his words with solemn slowness, as if each one carried weight. The elder said that white people do not know the jungle after dark. He said that there, at the Chitadap waterfall, lives Orang Batak, a winged devil whose cry of Ahul heralds death. He said that when we heard that sound, we should fall face down and not look up, because those who looked into the eyes of Orang Batak went mad or disappeared. 3 moons ago, his nephew did not return from there, and they found only the boy's sarong, covered in blood, hanging from a tree branch 30 meters above the ground. The elder asked us not to go there after sunset, because Orang Batak hunts when the sun hides behind the mountain. He slaughtered a chicken right in front of us, the blood dripping onto the rice, and left this offering to the spirits at the entrance to the jungle. Van Horn nodded politely, thanked him for the warning, but when we walked away, he told me it was just superstition aimed at protecting hunting grounds. On the 3rd day of our journey, as we climbed a steep slope overgrown with bamboo, the jungle suddenly fell silent around noon. The gibbons stopped screaming. The birds fell silent. Even the cicadas, whose constant noise accompanied our every step, stopped their song at the same time as if on command. The silence enveloped us, thick and oppressive. I stopped, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and looked at Reinhard ahead of me. He too had frozen, his head turned to one side, listening. The porters also stopped moving, their faces tense. We stood like that for about 20 minutes, while the silence remained, broken only by our breathing and the distant sound of water. Then, Just as suddenly, the cicadas resumed their noise. A bird cried out somewhere to the left, and a gibbon answered from the right. Life returned to the jungle, but Bambang whispered something to Sutrisno in Sundanese, his eyes continuing to dart across the treetops. By evening of the same day, we came to a large banyan tree whose aerial roots hung down like curtains, forming a natural arbor 40 feet in diameter. Under the tree, neatly arranged in a circle on a flat rock, lay 17 dead flying squirrels. I crouched down next to them, pulling out a magnifying glass. Each one was missing its head. The necks were not bitten or torn off, but rather separated with surgical precision, the skin and muscles cut cleanly. The bodies were untouched, the fur undamaged, the wings neatly folded. There was almost no blood, only dark spots near the cervical vertebrae. Peter asked what could have done this. Reinhard examined one corpse, turning it in his hands, sniffing it. He said he didn't know of any predator that would kill like this and leave only the heads behind. Van Horn ordered us not to touch the bodies, and we set up camp 50 yards from the banyan tree. But no one said aloud what everyone was feeling. It was a demonstration, a message. At night, a wave of smell washed over our camp. At first, I thought someone had knocked over the container of guano that Reinhard had collected for studying parasites, but the container was closed. The smell hung heavy in the air. The musty musk of old bat droppings mixed with the rotten, fishy scent of fermented fruit and decaying flesh. Underneath it all was a pungent ammoniacal smell that stung my nostrils and throat, and a strange sweetness reminiscent of overripe durian with a metallic aftertaste. I covered my nose with a handkerchief, my eyes watering. The smell lingered for about 10 minutes, then dissipated as suddenly as it had appeared. Sutrin sat motionless by the fire, staring into the darkness beyond the light. When I asked if he knew what the smell was, he replied with a single word in Sundanese that I didn't understand, and said nothing more until morning. On the fourth day, the trail led us to a stream, clear and fast, flowing over basalt rocks. I bent down to fill my flask when Peter shouted from the opposite bank. He was standing by a clayey patch pointing downwards. We crossed the stones and saw an imprint pressed into the soft clay an inch deep. The shape resembled a human palm, 18 inches long and 15 inches wide, with 5 fingers fanning out, but traces of webbing visible between them. Instead of fingernails, there were deep grooves from claws, each 3 inches long, curved and sharp. I placed my hand next to it for comparison. The print was 3 times larger than my palm. Reinhard took out a tape measure, measured it, and wrote the numbers in his notebook. He said he had never seen anything like it in 15 years in Indonesia. Van Horn examined the surrounding rocks and showed us 3 more prints on a vertical basalt wall 4 meters above the ground. The claws had left scratches in the hard stone. Something had climbed the rock with enough weight to leave marks in the basalt. We didn't talk about it openly, but our pace quickened. The porters began whispering to each other in Sundanese more and more often, their eyes constantly looking up at the canopy where the branches closed at a height of 80 feet. Sutrisno approached Van Horn at the next rest stop and said that his men wanted to set up camp no later than 4 o'clock in the afternoon, before the sun began to set behind the ridge. Van Horn objected that we were losing too much daylight, but Sutrisno stood firm. He said that after dark, the jungle did not belong to us. We agreed. On the 5th day, moving along a narrow path along the cliff, Agus found a tuft of wool on a broken acacia branch 6 meters above the ground. The branch was as thick as my wrist, freshly broken, the bark stripped off. The wool hung in a clump 8 to 10 inches long, gray-brown in color and stiff to the touch. I took a sample and examined it under a magnifying glass. The structure of the hair did not match anything known, thicker than a monkey's, but with a hollow core like a bat's, where air fills the channel for insulation. I wrapped the sample in oiled paper and recorded the location of the find. Reinhard said that the branch had been broken recently, no more than 2 days ago, and that something very heavy had landed on it with enough force to break a living tree. At night, we heard sounds. First, a distant, drawn-out cry, starting low and rising to a high note, lasting 4 or 5 seconds. The sound echoed through the gorge, reflecting off the rocks, so that it seemed to come from all sides at once. We froze by the fire. Peter dropped the pot he was cleaning. Darman whispered something and made a protective gesture with his hand. Then silence for a minute or two. Then a series of sharp clicks. Chack, chack, chack. Similar to dolphin echolocation, but lower, vibrating in the chest. The sound was getting closer. Chack, chack, chack. Closer. Reinhard raised his double-barreled shotgun and cocked the hammers. Sutras ordered everyone to be quiet and not move. We sat like that until the sounds faded away, dissolving into the darkness of the jungle. No one slept that night. We kept the fire burning until dawn. On the 6th day, the trail led us to the Chitadap waterfall. The vertical stream fell from a height of 45 meters, crashing onto the black basalt below with a roar that drowned out all other sounds. The pool at the foot was deep, surrounded by steep cliffs covered with moss and vines. The air here was 5 degrees colder, saturated with water mist, and visibility was reduced by a rainbow-colored haze. I saw a cave behind the curtain of water, a dark gap 8 meters high and 12 meters wide, leading into the thickness of the mountain. We walked around the pool on a narrow ledge, clinging to the roots. At the entrance to the crevice in the rock, about 10 meters above the water level, Bambang found what he called a bone pit. A pile of bones filled the 3-foot-deep crevice. The skulls of langur monkeys, civet ribs, bird bones, all mixed together into a compressed mass. All the skulls were crushed with equal precision, the flesh eaten away, but not by a predator. Rather, scraped off with methodical precision. The smell of decay rose thickly. I picked up one langur skull and examined the cracks. The force of the blow had been enormous. The bone cracked radially from the center point. Reinhard said this was hunting territory. Van Horn decided to set up base camp here, 50 yards from the water, on a flat area under the canopy of giant ferns. Peter found a piece of skin hanging from a branch 7 feet up. It was 30 by 40 inches, gray with dark spots, leathery and elastic in texture, crisscrossed with a network of fine lines resembling blood vessels. At the edges were remnants of fur, stiff gray-brown hairs an inch long. I thought of a wing, but the structure was too thick, about 2 millimeters. Reinhard said it might be shed skin, but reptiles shed differently. I packed the sample in an alcohol jar. Nearby, on a basalt rock by the waterfall, there was a series of deep parallel grooves, 5 lines, each 2 inches deep and 1.5 inches wide. They ran vertically for 4 feet, as if something huge had sharpened its claws on the rock. The surface inside the grooves was smooth, polished by repeated friction. I ran my fingers over the scratches. Basalt is hard. It takes enormous force to leave such marks. We set up our tents in a triangle, with a fire in the center and our gear under a tarp. Van Horn planned to spend 3 days here, exploring the area around the waterfall and, if possible, entering the cave behind the curtain of water. Reinhard objected, saying that all signs pointed to the presence of a large predator, probably unknown to science, and that we should be cautious. Van Horn replied that this was precisely why we were here, to catalog the unknown. The night of September 7th brought fog. It descended from the peaks after sunset, white and thick, reducing visibility to 10 feet. The temperature dropped to 22 degrees, and the air became humid and heavy. We sat around the fire, kerosene lamps burning dimly in the milky whiteness around us. Darman cooked rice in a pot. Peter cleaned the plant samples he had collected during the day. Sutras and the porters smoked local tobacco wrapped in banana leaves. The sound came without warning. Whoosh, whoosh, the heavy swishing of a huge piece of cloth or leather right above us in the fog. We froze. The sound passed from left to right, not the flapping of a bird's wings, but a deep, powerful movement of air. Then silence. Then a scream. Ahul, oh, 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 so loud and close that Peter's nose started bleeding. He grabbed his face, blood flowing between his fingers. I rushed to him with bandages, but his eyes were looking up into the fog, wide open. It appeared silently from the whiteness, flying 4 or 5 meters above my head. I was standing at the edge of the platform, holding the bandage in my hand, and the wind from its wings hit me with such force that it knocked off my cork helmet. I fell to my knees, my head thrown back. The wingspan was enormous. 12 feet, maybe more. Dark, leathery wings stretched between long fingers, the body massive, covered with fur. It turned and hovered 25 feet above us, slowly flapping its wings. Its head turned, studying us. I saw an ape-like face with a shortened muzzle, huge black eyes the size of chicken eggs, reflecting the light of the fire red like a cat's. Its wide nostrils flared. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth and 2 protruding fangs 5 or 6 inches long. Its body was muscular, especially its shoulders and chest, covered with thick gray-brown fur. At the bend of its wings, powerful clawed fingers about a foot long were visible. Reinhard raised his double-barreled shotgun. The shot rang out, the echo rolling through the gorge. The creature let out a cry, not an Ahul, but a sharp, angry shriek, and spread its wings fully, revealing a wingspan that blocked out the stars. White scars were visible on its chest and shoulders, and on its right wing was an old wound that had deformed the membrane. Then it folded its wings and fell like a stone, opening them literally a meter from the ground near the fire. The blast of air scattered the coals. Sparks flew. Darman ran toward the tents, but the creature turned with incredible speed, its clawed fingers on its wings digging into the ground, its hind legs pushing off, and it soared upward, grabbing Darman by the shoulders. 8 to 10-inch claws pierced fabric and flesh. Darman screamed. The creature lifted him 3 meters and carried him toward the cave. Reinhard fired a second shot. The shot hit the wing, and the creature loosened its grip. Darman fell onto the rocks on his back from a height of 10 feet. I ran to him, grabbed him under the armpits, and dragged him to the fire. Sutrisno and Bambang helped. Darman's shoulders were torn by deep lacerations, the bone visible. Blood flowed quickly, pulsing. I pressed bandages against the wounds, but felt an unnatural movement under my hands. His back was broken, his spine damaged in 2 places. Darman coughed up blood, his eyes rolled back. I gave him as much morphine as I could, but the pain was unbearable. He lived for 2 hours, gasping and wheezing, until his spine gave out completely and his breathing stopped. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Reinhard reloaded his shotgun with buckshot and stood with it by the fire. Van Horn wrote down his observations with a trembling hand. Peter sat with his knees pressed to his chest. The blood under his nose dried into a black crust. In the morning, Agus and Bambang sat in a tight group, whispering in Sundanese. I sat next to Darman's body, covered with a tarp, and stared into the fog, where the sound of wings sometimes came from afar. Whoosh, whoosh, circling, watching. On the morning of September 8th, the fog cleared. The birds returned, the cicadas resumed their noise. The jungle looked normal, as if the nightmare had never happened. Only the deep furrows in the ground around the fire, where claws had dug in, and the blood on the rocks, and the body under the tarp proved the reality of what had happened. Sumtring said his men wanted to leave. Bambang said the same thing. Agus was silent but nodded. Van Horn asked me what I thought. I said that we had encountered an unknown species of primate adapted to flight, probably a nocturnal predator defending its territory, and that it would be prudent to retreat. Reinhard agreed, but Van Horn stood firm. He said we were on the verge of the greatest zoological discovery of the century, that no Western scientific institution had ever documented a flying primate, and that retreating now would mean that no one would believe our report without proof. He proposed one day to enter the cave during the day when the creature was likely asleep, take photographs, collect samples, and then descend the mountain immediately. Peter refused to go. His hands trembled as he spoke and his voice broke. Van Horn did not insist. Sutrisno said his men would stay at camp. Only 4 of us, Bartels, Van Horn, Reinhard, and Bambang, would gather our equipment and enter the cave on the morning of September 9th. We spent the entire day of the 8th preparing. We checked the ropes, packed resin-soaked torches, took kerosene lamps, a camera with 12 plates, notebooks, sample jars, and a medical kit. Reinhard loaded his rifle and took extra ammunition. Bambang sharpened his machete to razor sharpness. I checked the contents of the morphine and bandages, although I knew that if something went wrong, it would not be enough. On the evening of the 8th, Peter left the tent to relieve himself, despite my warnings to wait until dawn. We heard his footsteps receding toward the edge of the clearing. Then a cry, short, choppy, the sound of wings. We ran out with torches. Peter's boots were by the rock where he had taken them off, nothing else. On the morning of the 9th, we found his blood-stained shirt hanging from a tree branch 20 meters above us. Traces of blood led to the cliff above the waterfall, then disappeared. We didn't find the body. Van Horn said we were continuing. I didn't object. Something inside me broke after the second death, and I acted mechanically, performing tasks without thinking. We set out at dawn on September 9th. We walked around the pool on a ledge, holding onto a rope tied to stakes. The curtain of the waterfall crashed down on the right with a deafening roar, spraying us with cold water. Behind the stream, the entrance to the cave opened up. A gaping darkness from which emanated coolness and the smell of guano. We lit our torches and went inside. The ceiling rose 20 meters, disappearing into the darkness above. The floor was covered with a layer of guano knee-deep, soft and sticky, saturated with urine and decay. The smell was unbearable. Concentrated musk, ammonia, rot. I wrapped a scarf around my face and breathed through my mouth. Clusters of fruit bats hung from the ceiling, dozens, maybe hundreds. When the light from the torches touched them, they fluttered in panic, their wings flapping, their cries piercing. The cloud rose, swirled, and flew out of the cave past us. We moved deeper inside. The walls were damp, covered with moss and lichen. The stones bore the same deep scratches we had found outside. Parallel grooves made by claws. At the far end of the cave, the floor rose to a natural altar of stalagmites, white and shiny. Around the base lay bones, human bones. I crouched down and examined them. The skulls were crushed, the ribs broken, the long bones split open to extract the marrow. 3 skulls, maybe 4, mixed with animal bones. On the walls nearby were ancient rock paintings, faded red ochre. Figures of people with raised hands, and above them a huge winged creature with outstretched wings. Reinhard whispered that we should leave. Van Horn took out his camera and began setting up the tripod. Bambang stood with his machete, looking into the darkness beyond the altar where the cave continued. The sound came from there, chak chak chak, low clicks of echolocation. Then a second sound, slightly higher in pitch, overlapping. 2 sources. Reinhard raised his rifle. I grabbed the torch with both hands. Van Horn didn't move, frozen by the camera. They emerged from the darkness together. 2 creatures, male and female, moving on 4 legs, wings folded along their bodies. Height at the withers 4 feet, body length 6. Fur gray-brown, thick. The male's head is more massive, fangs longer. Their eyes were black, huge, without eyelids, staring straight at us. The female was slightly smaller, with 2 pairs of swollen, lactating nipples visible on her chest. They did not attack immediately. They stopped 20 feet away and watched. Their heads turned, studying each of us. The male let out a low growl, a chesty sound that vibrated in the stone beneath our feet. The female responded with a higher-pitched sound, almost like a baby's cry. Behind them, in a hollow between the stalagmites, I saw a nest, a tangle of branches, leaves, and fur. In it lay 2 cubs the size of large dogs, covered in light gray-white down, their eyes half closed, their wings underdeveloped and folded. They squeaked when they heard their parents. The female moved first. She opened her wings halfway and stepped forward. The male followed, flanking her on the right. Reinhard fired. The shot hit the male in the shoulder. Blood spurted, but he didn't stop. He turned and jumped, his wings fully spread, a 12-foot wingspan filling the space. He struck Reinhard from above, his claws grabbing his chest, his fangs aimed at his throat. Bambang rushed forward with his machete, shouting something in Sundanese. He struck the male on the wing, the blade cutting through the membrane. The creature released Reinhard and turned to Bambang. It grabbed him with its claws on its wings, pressed him to its chest, wrapping its membranes around him like a cloak. Bambang stabbed with his knife, but the creature tilted its head and bit his neck, its fangs severing his carotid artery. Blood spurted out like a fountain. Bambang went limp. The creature threw the body on the floor, where it fell motionless. The female attacked me. I swung my torch. The fire touched her muzzle. She recoiled, but did not run away. A clawed finger on its wing struck, knocking the torch from my hands. I fell, my hands protecting my face. Weight pressed down on me, the smell of guano and musk filling my lungs. Fangs scraped my forearm, tearing my shirt and skin. Pain exploded in white. A shot rang out. The female flew away. Reinhard stood there, his rifle smoking, the front of his shirt covered in blood. But he held his ground. He shouted for us to run. We went out through the waterfall, the spray blinding us, the rope in our hands burning from friction. We climbed down the ledge without stopping until we reached the campsite. Serino and Agus had already gathered the equipment. Peter was gone, dead. Bambang didn't return, dead. Darman was buried under rocks at the edge of the clearing. 3 dead in 4 days. We left Mount Salak around noon on September 9th, descending the trail as fast as our legs would carry us. I bandaged the wound on my forearm. Reinhard's chest wound was deeper but not fatal. The claws had slipped across his ribs without piercing them. Van Horn carried the camera, but the plates remained unused. He never took a single picture. By evening, we had reached the edge of the fog, where the jungle opened up into the drier forests of the lower slopes. Birds were calling. Gibbons swung from the branches. The air smelled normal. Earth, leaves, rain. It seemed as if the world had closed the wound of the previous night. Only the blood on our shirts, the pain in our forearms, and the absence of 3 comrades told us that it had not been a nightmare. We reached Batavia at the end of September. Van Horn presented his report to the director of the Botanical Garden, describing the expedition as partially successful. They had collected flora samples but had encountered accidents. He said that Darman had fallen off a cliff. He said Peter had drowned in a waterfall pool. He said Bambang had been killed by a wild boar. I didn't object. The truth would have sounded crazy. Reinhard returned to Borneo 2 months later. His letters to me were short, factual, with no mention of Salak. He never returned to Java. Van Horn continued his work in the garden, but did not organize any new expeditions to the mountains. His notebook with his observations disappeared from the archives a year later. I checked.